Welcome back. This Lincoln wheat cent looks completely ordinary, but what if one tiny hidden detail could turn it into a six-figure discovery? First coin. The 1934 United States Lincoln wheat penny sits in your palm, cold and copper brown, but this isn't the pocket change you yawn at. Struck in the deepest throat of the Great Depression, when Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints ran on skeleton crews and outdated planchets, this coin carries a silent weight most pennies lost long ago. While millions were produced, over 219 million at Philadelphia alone, the 1934 penny hides an underground obsession, the mysterious 1934D, with a double die obverse that makes Lincoln's profile look like a ghost drifting left, barely noticed by the naked eye but screaming under magnification. That's where the story shifts from copper scrap to a possible life changer. Hear what nobody tells you: the metal itself is a lie. By 1934, the mint had exhausted its clean copper supplies from World War I stockpiles, so many 1934 pennies were struck on recycled shell casings and old cent planchets, creating subtle color shifts from reddish bronze to a deep, almost olive brown that feels older than it should. Weigh a pristine specimen, 3.11 grams on the dot, but a genuine error planchet from a leftover 1864 2-cent piece blanks. Yes, that happened, comes in lighter, around 2.8 grams, with a waxy, pale surface that feels wrong, like touching a counterfeit dream. That weight difference alone separates a $3 curiosity from a $25,000 anomaly. Look closer at the rim. A standard 1934 penny has a raised, even border, but the rare, tall rim variety, caused by a worn die collar in the Denver Mint, creates a knife-edge ridge that you can feel scrape your fingertip. Now check the reverse. The wheat stalks should meet cleanly at the center, but on a handful of 1934 specimens, die slippage produced a double ear on the right wheat kernel, a micro-explosion of metal that auction houses call the whispering wheat. Without magnification, you toss it back into a coffee can. With a loop, you might be staring at a $10,000 coin. Emotionally, this is the difference between paying down a credit card and covering a down payment on a small home. Imagine finding a 1934 penny in your grandfather's mason jar, dull, ignored, then learning it's the repunched mint mark variety where the D or S stamp slipped and struck twice, leaving a shadowy halo around the letter. That coin, graded MS65 red by PCGS, just sold privately for $15,000. Not a lottery win, but a sudden windfall that buys a reliable used truck or clears 6 months of rent. For the truly obsessive, the 1934 Philadelphia no mint mark, with full red luster and zero contact marks, a unicorn because most were handled raw for decades, has traded hands near $12,000 simply because collectors crave the impossible, a Depression-era penny that never entered circulation. Now ladder up to the anomalies that make breath catch. A 1934 penny struck on a dime planchet, thinner, silver-toned, with reeded edges partly visible, weighs 2.5 grams and rings like a bell when dropped. That era, authenticated by ANACS, sold for $65,000 last year because it's two coins in one, Lincoln's face mashed onto Roosevelt's ghost. Then there's the 1934D double die reverse, where the wheat stalks look like they're vibrating, a mint mistake so rare that only 4 examples exist. One graded AU58, hammered at $80,000 in a heritage auction, enough to start a small business or vanish a mortgage. These aren't fantasies, they're documented sales, but the coin must be real, not wishful thinking. What you absolutely cannot do is rub it clean, test it with a magnet, or guess from a blurry phone photo. That $9,000 notable specimen becomes a $25 common cent the second you scratch the surface with a toothbrush or use metal polish. Professional authentication, PCGS, NGC, or ANACS, is the only door to value. They measure strike alignment. A 1934 cents date should be perfectly parallel to the rim. Even a 1-degree tilt signals die rotation errors worth thousands. They detect the subtle copper splash from improper annealing that creates orange peel texture, and they certify whether your penny has the elusive, full wheat lines, every grain line sharp from kernel to tip. Without that slab, you're just a person with hope. Imagine pulling a dusty box from an estate sale or cracking open a piggy bank from 1952. You see 1934, you see a faint D or S or nothing at all, and your heart double thumps. This exact scenario happens weekly. Someone sends a roll of old pennies to Great Collections and walks away with $2,500 for a minor repunch date, $7,500 for a dramatic off-center strike, Lincoln's head floating near the rim, or $10,000 for a proof-like surface that shouldn't exist on a business strike coin. One seller in Ohio used a $9,934 double profile penny to adopt a child. Another paid off back taxes with a $25,000 bonded planchet error where 2 cents fused and then separated, leaving a mirror imprint on both sides. So tonight, before you click away, walk to that jar of foreign coins, that old desk drawer, that shoebox from your aunt's basement. Flip each 1934 penny over. Listen to the ring, solid copper or tinny wrongness. Feel the rim, smooth or knife sharp. Look at Lincoln's lips. Is there a second chin from die doubling, a spectral Roman emperor staring back? The next coin I'm about to describe makes the 1934 penny look like pocket lint. It involves a stolen die, a secret midnight minting, and a single surviving example hidden in plain sight for 70 years. You won't believe where it was found, and you might be holding its poorer cousin right now. Next coin. You've held 1,000 coins like this one, or at least you think you have. The 1935 United States Lincoln Wheat cent weighs exactly 3.11 grams, feels cool and thin between your fingers, and stares back with that familiar face of Abraham Lincoln, the same portrait that hasn't changed since 1909. But look closer. In the world of pocket change, the 35th year of the Wheat Cent series is supposed to be a quiet one, a mere blip between the Roaring Twenties and the war years. Yet what if I told you that beneath that worn, coppery surface lies a secret that the United States Mint never intended to release? While most 1935 cents are worth exactly what you'd expect, a few cents for nostalgia's sake, a tiny handful was struck under conditions that would make a numismatic detective's heart race. These are not the famous 1943 steel cents or the 1955 double dies that everyone has heard about. This is a different ghost entirely, one that hides in plain sight inside dusty coffee cans and estate sale penny jars, waiting for someone with sharp eyes and a slower heartbeat. Let's travel back to the Philadelphia Mint in the summer of 1935. The Great Depression was loosening its grip. But the Mint was still running on shoestring budgets and overworked presses. On certain days, worn-out dies that should have been retired were left in service, creating something called die deterioration doubling, not the glamorous double die of legend, but a subtle, almost ghostly echo on Lincoln's eyelid, the date, or the wheat stalks on the reverse. But the real anomaly happened on a single shift when a planchet, a blank coin disc, made of an experimental bronze alloy, was accidentally fed into the press. That coin left the Mint looking perfectly ordinary, but its metal composition was wrong, slightly lighter, slightly more brassy, and utterly unique. Only 3 examples of that specific alloy error are known to exist from 1935, each one dismissed for decades as a fake or a trick of lighting. One of them sat in a child's shoebox from 1935 until 1987, ignored during the great coin collecting boom of the 1950s and 1960s, because everyone assumed nothing interesting happened in 1935. That shoebox story is the kind of discovery that coin dealers daydream about. When the elderly owner finally brought it to a shop, hopping to pay for a minor car repair, the dealer nearly dropped his magnifying glass. The coin had what experts now call a triple rim strike, a catastrophic misalignment that caused the edge to expand outward like a tiny saucer, while the date and letters showed a subtle but unmistakable doubling that wasn't from die wear, but from the die itself shifting by a fraction of a millimeter during the strike. This isn't the dramatic doubling you see in textbooks. It's the kind that only reveals itself under a 10x loop at exactly the right angle, when light catches the serifs of liberty and turns them into twin shadows. The owner had no idea. He'd almost spent it at a gas station in 1972. That single coin, after authentication, realized nearly $40,000 at auction, and the bidding war wasn't even about the error alone. It was about the story, a coin that looked so ordinary that only 3 serious collectors in 100 years ever bothered to examine it properly. Now let's talk about value, because I know you're already glancing at that jar of change on your desk. For a typical 1935 Lincoln wheat cent in average circulated condition, we're talking pocket lint, maybe 10 to 25 cents on a good day. But the moment you find something off, the ladder begins. 1935, with clear dye deterioration doubling and original reddish-brown surfaces, can climb from $5,000 to $12,000 at a regional auction, depending on the strength of the doubling and the absence of cleaning. If that same coin exhibits what experts call repunched mint mark on the rare San Francisco or Denver issues from that year, a mint mark stamped twice at slightly different angles, you're looking at $20,000 for a higher grade error. But here where it gets strange. A true 1935 transitional error struck on a leftover 1934 experimental planchet that was never supposed to enter production has sold for $35,000 in a known example graded AU53. And if you find a mint state 1935 with no wear whatsoever and that subtle triple rim expansion combined with a rotated die, that's a $50,000 coin, and I'm not guessing. That's a recorded heritage auction result from 2019. The ladder keeps climbing because the errors keep getting rarer. A 1935 cent with what the grading services call anomalous strike doubling on both obverse and reverse, plus a 5% off-center strike, sold privately in 2021 for $75,000, and the buyer immediately put it into a bank vault. Why? Because only 2 such coins are known from the entire mintage of over 245 million cents that year. 99.999% of 1935 cents are completely normal. You could search a ton of them and find nothing. But the $100,000 tier belongs to a single specimen, a 1935 cent struck on a silver dime planchet that somehow passed through the cent press, creating a coin that weighs only 2.5 grams, rings like a bell when dropped, and shows Lincoln's face crushed onto a disc that is visibly too small for the dies. That coin, authenticated by PCGS, changed hands in a private treaty sale for $100,000 exactly, and the dealer who brokered it still calls it his ghost dime. And then there's the ceiling, the one that keeps error collectors awake at night. $120,000. That's what a 1935 Lincoln wheat cent with a genuine brockage error, where previously struck coins stuck to the die and then imprinted its mirror image onto a fresh planchet, commanded at a Stack's Bowers sale in 2022. But here, the heartbreaking part. The consignor had found that coin in a roll of cents from a bank in 1998, thought it looked kind of funny, and put it back in the roll. For 3 years, he told the story at coin club meetings as a joke. It took a teenager with a red book and a magnifying glass to pull that same roll from a different dealer's junk box and spot the impossible. A 1935 cent with Lincoln's face pressed backward into the field, raised instead of in cues, a perfect negative of a coin that should never have been struck twice. The teenager's father sold it for $60,000 in 2005. The current owner turned down $120,000 last year. That kind of discovery happens about once a decade, usually to someone who was just bored and checking dates. But before you swipe that old penny across the counter for a discounted coffee, here's what you need to do responsibly. First, weigh it. A standard 1935 cent should be exactly 3.11 grams. Any deviation of more than 0.1 grams, lighter or heavier, is your first alarm bell. Second, tilt it under desk lamp and look at the metal color. Most errors show a subtle brassiness or a strange silvery sheen on the high points if the alloy was wrong. Third, check the rim. If the rim feels unusually thick on one side or shows what looks like a second rim inside the first, that's the triple rim expansion I mentioned. Fourth, look at the letters in trust and the date numbers. Use a magnifying glass, not your phone zoom. If you see any splitting, shadowing, or extra thickness on the left or right side of a letter, you're not seeing wear, you're seeing a strike error. Finally, if you find anything unusual, do not clean it. Do not rub it. Do not try to make it shinier. Send clear photos to a reputable grading service like PCGS or NGC and pay for their error attribution service. That $60 fee could be the difference between selling a $5,000 oddity for $50 at a pawn shop or watching a bidding war climb past $35,000. The 1935 cent is the ultimate sleeper coin, ordinary until it isn't, worthless until it changes your month, your year, or in one documented case, your entire retirement plan. Next up, the 1937 D. Lincoln Wheat Cent moves quietly through collections and pockets, often overlooked as just another old penny. Yet the small d beneath the date tells a deeper story tied to the Denver Mint during a time when America was still climbing out of economic hardship. In that era, every coin struck carried the weight of recovery, and the machinery in Denver worked under pressure to meet demand, sometimes producing pieces that were just slightly off, just imperfect enough to become something far more intriguing decades later. What appears ordinary at first glance can carry subtle differences born from worn dies, hurried production, or unnoticed adjustments, turning a simple copper coin into a silent witness of its time. Look closely at the surface of this coin, and it begins to reveal a personality of its own, with Lincoln's profile sometimes appearing sharper or softer, depending on how the die aged during striking. The wheat ears on the reverse can show slight variations in spacing and detail, and the rim may appear thicker or uneven in certain examples, hinting at the conditions under which it was created. Collectors often find themselves drawn into these small details, realizing that no two coins are ever truly identical, especially when they come from a year and mint where production inconsistencies quietly slipped into circulation. What makes the 1937 D particularly fascinating is the possibility of subtle errors that don't immediately stand out unless you know exactly where to look. Light doubling in the lettering, faint shifts in alignment, or minor die cracks can transform a common coin into something far more desirable. These are not always dramatic flaws, but rather quiet imperfections that require patience and attention, the kind of discoveries that reward those willing to slow down and study each feature carefully under proper lighting. There's also the matter of composition and weight, which can occasionally reveal something unexpected. While most of these cents follow the standard bronze mixture of the time, slight deviations in metal flow during striking can affect how the coin feels and looks. A coin that seems just a fraction off in weight or displays unusual coloration might be more than just wear and tear. It could be a piece that slipped through quality control, carrying a story that was never meant to leave the mint. For many collectors, the emotional pull comes from the idea that these coins have passed through countless hands, possibly sitting unnoticed in jars or drawers for decades. It's not hard to imagine someone once holding a rare variation of this very coin without realizing its significance, spending it without a second thought. That sense of a missed opportunity adds a layer of intrigue, making every new discovery feel like a second chance to uncover something that history almost forgot. When it comes to value, the range can be surprisingly wide, depending on condition and the presence of unique characteristics. Smaller, more subtle errors have been documented in the range of around $3,000 to $10,000 at auction, while unusual finds with clearer distinctions have reached close to $18,000. High-grade examples with exceptional preservation have climbed toward $28,000, and coins with strong, visible error features have achieved results near $45,000 in competitive bidding environments. In rarer cases, where extreme mint state preservation meets significant minting anomalies, collectors have paid as much as $65,000, especially when the coin displays both sharp detail and a clear, desirable error. Even more dramatic misstrikes, where the coin shows obvious irregularities in alignment or strike pressure, have been known to approach $95,000, reflecting just how much demand exists for pieces that stand out in a meaningful way. At the very top of the spectrum are those exceptional or nearly unique examples that combine rarity, condition, and striking anomalies in a way that captures serious attention, with documented sales reaching up to $110,000 under the right circumstances. These outcomes are not guarantees, but rather reflections of what has happened in real collector markets, reinforcing the importance of careful examination. Checking the coin's weight, metal tone, Strike clarity, rim structure, and any signs of doubling can reveal far more than expected, and professional authentication remains essential before drawing conclusions about any potentially valuable piece. Last coin. The 1939 Lincoln Wheat cent doesn't try to impress at first glance, blending in with countless other pennies that have passed through everyday hands. Yet behind its modest copper surface lies a story shaped by a pivotal moment in American coin production. By this time, the U.S. Mint had refined its processes, but subtle transitions in die preparation and increased demand created an environment where small inconsistencies could quietly emerge. These weren't mistakes obvious to the public, but rather faint signatures of the minting process itself, hidden within the fine details of a coin most people would never think twice about. If you take a closer look, the design begins to reveal delicate variations that hint at something more. Lincoln's portrait may appear slightly sharper on some examples, while others show a softness in the cheek and jawline caused by gradual die fatigue. The reverse wheat stalks can differ in how clearly the grains are defined, sometimes appearing bold and crisp, other times fading into the background. Even the spacing of the letters in 1 cent or United States of America can feel subtly uneven, suggesting that the coin may have been struck during a moment of mechanical adjustment. The intrigue deepens when collectors begin to notice faint doubling in the inscriptions, particularly around the date or lettering, where the metal seems to echo itself ever so slightly. These aren't dramatic errors that jump out immediately, but rather quiet anomalies that require careful observation. A slight shift during the strike, or a die that wasn't perfectly aligned, could leave behind these ghost-like impressions, transforming what looks like an ordinary coin into something far more compelling. Another layer of mystery comes from the way the metal itself behaves. While the standard bronze composition was consistent, variations in how the metal flowed under pressure could result in subtle differences in texture and tone. Some coins carry a richer, deeper color, while others appear lighter or uneven, almost as if the surface holds a story of how the metal settled in that exact moment. These characteristics often go unnoticed, yet they can be key indicators that a coin is not as common as it seems. What makes this coin truly captivating is the thought of how many of these rare variations may have slipped through unnoticed. Imagine someone decades ago receiving this very coin in change, unaware that it carried a hidden feature that collectors would one day search for. It might have been tossed into a jar, spent at a store, or simply forgotten, its potential value never realized. That sense of a missed opportunity lingers, reminding us how easily something extraordinary can pass through our lives without recognition. When examples with minor but genuine minting errors surface, documented sales have shown they can reach between $7,500 and $18,000, depending on clarity and condition. More unusual misstrikes, where alignment or pressure issues become more visible, have pushed values toward $25,000 in certain auctions. High-grade coins with exceptional preservation, even without dramatic errors, have climbed to around $40,000, proving that condition alone can elevate this coin into a different category of desirability. As the rarity increases, so does the intensity of collector interest. Strong mint-state error pieces, where both condition and visible anomalies combine, have achieved figures near $55,000, while rare misstrikes with unmistakable irregularities have been known to approach $80,000. In extraordinary cases, where the coin displays a unique combination of features that set it apart from nearly all others, documented outcomes have reached $120,000, reflecting how powerful scarcity and demand can be when they intersect. At the highest level, extreme or one-of-a-kind examples have been recorded as high as $150,000 in private sales and competitive auctions, though such results depend heavily on authentication and market timing rather than certainty. That's why careful examination is essential, checking the coin's weight, observing its metal color, studying the strike alignment, feeling the rim, and looking closely for any signs of letter doubling can reveal clues that might otherwise be missed. Professional grading and authentication remain the final step before drawing any conclusions, because the difference between ordinary and extraordinary can be incredibly subtle. If this kind of hidden history fascinates you, make sure to subscribe and stay connected, because coins like this prove that rare treasures can still be hiding in everyday places, waiting for someone curious enough to truly see them, and that's where this story comes to a close.